Hi, this is Rex at RW Mods. I wanted to do a video on this LRP ZR32 Spec 4. I got this in to modify for a guy, and I had been on the Facebook page Nitro RC Enthusiasts. I've been on that for a while this year, and there's a lot of people who really like this engine. They talk about this engine a lot, and I didn't know it was popular with monster truck guys, bashers, and even some drag racers, I think, too. So I got this in to modify, and I thought I'd do a review on it. It's popular, kind of show people the internals if they hadn't seen them and stuff. So this engine's partially modified at the time of me going through it here. Not quite done with it, but I got most of the work done with it. First off, it is a pretty good looking engine. I think, you know, that's part of the reason guys like it, is it's got some nice, the block looks nice, the heads definitely looks nice. You know, it's a racy looking engine. The other appeal would be, you know, 32. It's a big engine, should make some power and stuff too. Now these are made by SH, who also makes Dynamite, so you'll see some similarities if you know what the internals look like on those. So it's not necessarily, SH makes some good engines. Dynamite's always had, the ones Dynamites I've had have been pretty good too. Not quite a race engine, but they're pretty good for the price. This engine, I just looked up, a couple places had it for like $179.99, so $180, which is more than what I, you know, consider like an SH engine, you know, to go for, Dynamite, you know. But we'll look at the inside and kind of determine that. I do know that I've seen some on the Nitro RC Enthusiast page. Some guys have been complaining about some QC problems with the LRPs. So especially burrs in the ports and such. So they kind of recommend taking it apart and deburring the ports and doing a little cleanup. I think that's one of the reasons this was sent to me also, was to make sure that's good. So we'll take it apart here and kind of look at things. So we got this LRP apart. First impressions, I guess I kind of knew what the internals look like. This engine being SH made, it looks a lot like some of the Dynamite SH engines, with a lot of cuts on the crank, which in general, you know, helps flow of the air coming out. But one thing I don't like is you got this you got a pretty big piston here, and for the cubic inch on this thing, so it's heavy. And then you have these cuts on the crank here, which kind of take away some of the counterweight. So to me, one of the biggest downfalls on this engine is the lack of counterweight for the big heavy piston. I guess you know, it would be probably ideal to add some carbide weights and stuff, and I have done that before, but it's pretty intensive to do, and it's really not worth it for me. I mean, a guy would have to pay me pretty good money, and it really wouldn't be worth it or whatever. Other than that, I think the cranks are pretty hard. I think the crank pin doesn't wear too awful fast on these. So I did a few mods to this one, a little more knife edge here. The biggest thing with a crank is to drill out. You know, people think you do a silicone ramp, it just helps airflow. Well, what actually drilling and siliconing the crank is, you're drilling out pretty deep here, probably to here or so. So you're taking quite a bit of material out of the crank and then filling it with a lighter silicone. The ramp doesn't hurt either, but this is the the major thing is you're taking quite a few grams out of the crank weight, so it will accelerate quicker. On this crank, I drilled that out, filled it with a special silicone that's nitro safe, nitro fuel safe. I try to help the counterweight a little bit by taking a little off the backside here, some material that could come off without making it weak. Knife edge a little bit of cut here to let the air flow. And then the most important part is to open up the crank timing. That's the crank opening. So when the crank is spinning this way, so when the crank window opens and closes is pretty critical on your power band and opening that up on most engines. Actually, this engine came with quite a bit of crank timing for a lower priced engine. Not really. I wouldn't say this is a race engine, so it does have some pretty good timing stock. The piston, like I said, is really good size. It's a big piston. You can kind of see it's got kind of a dull finish to it, which is actually a good thing. That's well, I guess in the one-to-one car engines, you buy like a hyper eutectic piston, which has more of I guess it's a silica, or it's like a sand type material and so it wears better. It's a little tougher material out of a cast, not a forged piston would be better. But this piston looks to be good. I saw online that some had the wrist pin hole drilled crooked in the piston, which could lead to problems, and this one looks pretty straight in there. It does seem odd that see where the pinch is down a ways, which typically only a pico based engines have that. The rod on these, I think they're decent. I think they've improved over time a little bit, but I think with the heavy piston, it could be kind of the weak link on if you run a lot of RPM or really run it hard and lean, like a dirt oval situation, things like that. Could be the weak link, possibly, especially with the heavy piston. That piston's gonna want to keep going up and it's want to keep going down, and it's quite a bit of stress on the rod. The sleeve, another thing I'm not real keen on is how thin these sleeves are because of the size of the piston. It can cause distortion if you get it hot, or possibly your pinch might kind of, as it pinches at the top, it could kind of distort the walls of the sleeve a little bit. The sleeve itself, the cuts aren't too bad on it. I did some modifying on this one. Give a little more exhaust timing and such for a little more top end. But so and then the other thing too with these 32s, that I saw online, a lot of guys were complaining about burrs and stuff, and everything is from the factory is very sharp on the ports inside and out. So a diamond file, I mean, I touched up some of the ports a little bit, but I made sure that all the burrs are gone. And there was actually on one of the ports, there was actually some metal shavings, pretty good sized metal shavings, kind of just sitting there too. So these are definitely one you'd want to take apart and clean, deburr the ports, even if you're not going to do anything modifying or anything to it. The pinch seemed pretty tight on it too, actually a little more than I would have thought. Going to the carb, it's actually a pretty nice looking carb. Nice heat insulator here, aluminum carb. You can see it's a decent looking carb, but it's a long low speed needle, 9mm restrictor in it. Should work pretty well. I've ran some Dynamite engines. It wasn't the same carburetor as this, but they tuned decent. The block, it's actually a pretty nice looking block. I'm not sure why they go so big here on this one side, but it's a little more heatsink, I guess. And one thing that's not real impressive is, I don't know, let's see if we can get it in the picture, is the port, the cuts in the ports, or you can see some chatter. Maybe I can get a light here and kind of shine it in there. So some of the cuts in the ports are kind of a little bit chatter in there. Maybe shine the light. It might be hard to see with the camera here, but there's some chatter in there. It's not going to hurt performance. It's just kind of a quality thing. It comes with a single sealed front bearing. I think the size, it's a 14mm crank, and that I didn't take the rear bearing out, but I think it's a 14 by 25.4, so a fairly common bearing. I know some of the Dynamite engines used kind of a weird size that you really only get through Horizon, so that would be a good thing if it comes with a standard type bearing. You can put like an Avid or something in it. Overall, the block looks pretty beefy. Got some nice machining on it, and overall that looks decent. Because the crank is the same for a pull start. I don't even know if they offer a rotor start, but it has the nub that sticks out for the pull start. So the back plate is relieved for that, which that's some case volume that's wasted there, and I'm not a real big fan of all these cuts. And it is nice to have a little bit of airflow there, but it's kind of excessive, and that also takes away from some case volume. You know, to do this engine right, if you're not going to run a pull start or whatever, you grind off the snub and then find a backplate that doesn't have that cut. We could offer some little bit of benefit to performance. The carb pinch bolt doesn't have any O-rings on it, which is kind of a minus, I would say. Most high-end engines have an O-ring on there on each side to prevent air from leaking in there. And there's, you know, you got an O-ring on the bottom that seals the carb, but there's a reason that most engines have an O-ring on there, and it just one less place for air to leak. You could put a little, you know, you could seal that up if you wanted, but I'm not a big fan of sealing too. Sometimes it can cause problems if you guys put too much on it and stuff. So just looking at the head button here, it's a decent shaped combustion chamber, nice smooth, no sharp edges. We got a R5 plug. I'm not sure. I don't know my plugs for these very well. It's not a turbo plug, so the combustion dome is going to be a little bit bigger, which it's a bigger piston. I don't think turbo head's going to give this much more performance or anything. So all in all, like, the head was probably the highlight of this engine. It's a pretty beefy fins on it. It's got some nice cuts, nice machining. That's actually probably one of the good selling points to this engine, is that it's a nice looking engine. So, you know, and people go by looks. I mean, they don't want something that looks cheap or whatever in their truck or car or whatever. So yeah, being a bigger size and engine, you know, bigger is always better, most people's eyes. So a nice looking big engine. Overall, I think this engine selling at $125 or whatever would be probably a good engine. I think, you know, selling up closer to 180, I think there's better options, I guess, at that price. The you know, there's other engines. I would say a good race 28 would outperform this one, last longer, and you know, it, in my eyes, a good 28, especially modified or whatever, would really outrun this and last longer because of the materials and such. Gonna have a little stronger rod and stuff. So I don't know. Overall, it's not a bad engine. I've ran, I don't know, a few years ago, my son ran a Dynamite 26 in his Truggy, and it lasted a long time. It put out good power. It was a fast engine. So I know, you know, they are a decent engine. They're not, I would say, they're a step up from RTR, but a step down from a race engine. So I think, like I said, the biggest downfall would be the crank weight. You're going to get some imbalance at higher RPMs. So that's the internals of this engine. Thanks for watching, and if you have any engine questions, modifying, rebuilding, look me up, RW Mods, and thanks for watching.